Hey, what's up? It's your boy, Coach K, on this beautiful Friday, and we are about to go through a practice question about joint mobilization. All right. So, if you need more practice questions just like this, go ahead and like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, and let's freaking get it. All right, I'm ready if you're ready. Let's go ahead and knock this one down. We have Aiden is being evaluated for mild discomfort in the right hip joint after a running injury 2 weeks ago. Upon examination, the patient has stiffness, hypomobility, decreased hip flexion, and internal rotation range of motion. Which of the following mobilizations should be performed first? So we have A, anterior, B, inferior, C, posterior, and D is distraction. All right, let's go up to the top of this question. It is one that I often get asked by my coaching program students. What is like the information you need to know for the NPTE about mobilizations? So I went ahead, created a question just like this. You got to know this stuff for the NPTE. Let's break it down. It says Aiden is being evaluated for mild discomfort in the right hip joint after a running injury 2 weeks ago. Let's not assume or add anything here, all right? We don't need to do crazy differential diagnosis. Keep this in mind. Right hip joint discomfort, and then it's after a running injury 2 weeks ago. It says upon examination, the patient has stiffness, hypomobility, decreased hip flexion, and internal rotation range of motion. Now, that hypomobility part is important. When we talk about hypomobility, we're talking about the joint mobility and the fact that it's not moving well here. It could be because of a tight capsule or something along the lines of that. But keep in mind these major signs and symptoms because this is going to help us select the right answer. Super important. It says, which of the following mobilizations should be performed first? All right, we go down to the answer choices: A, anterior, B, inferior, C, posterior, D, distraction. Locking your answer right now. What you got? Put it down. Okay. We're going to break this down and make sure we dominate this question here. A says anterior. Let me ask you a quick question. Would you do an anterior glide to improve hip mobility? Yes or no? All right. A lot of y'all are saying yes to that. I agree with you. You would. Okay. Now, would you do an anterior glide to improve hip flexion and internal rotation range of motion? The answer to that is no. In anterior glide, we use that to improve extension or external rotation. The patient doesn't have a problem with that. And so I'm going to go ahead and put an X next to this one. All right, let's take a look at B. Would I do an inferior glide to improve hip mobility? Yes, potentially. Would I do this to improve hip flexion and internal rotation range of motion? Well, I would do it to improve hip flexion because I know I need an inferior glide to get hip flexion above 90. But I don't do an inferior glide to improve internal rotation range of motion. Doesn't make sense there. I'm going to put an X next to B because it doesn't fully answer the question. It doesn't really address it. All right, let's take a look at C. I see a lot of you chose this one. All right, let's break it down. I would do a posterior glide to improve hip joint mobility, correct? That's something that you could potentially do. Now, would I do a posterior glide to improve hip flexion? Yes or no? A lot of y'all are saying yes for this. Love it. Would I do it to improve internal rotation range of motion? Yes, you would. I love it. I'm going to go ahead and put a check next to that one for now. Hold up now. Wait. We have a final answer, this D, that we need to go through. All right, so D says distraction. A lot of y'all are between two answers, I can tell. Would I do a distraction to improve hip joint mobility? The answer is yes, I could potentially. Could I use distraction to improve hip flexion and internal rotation range of motion? The answer to that is yeah, I could. It's a non-specific technique, but I could use it. For those of you who are not familiar with a distraction, let me go ahead and draw out. This is going to be the acetabulum here. This is going to be the femoral head. A distraction is when you take the two bones and separate them in a perpendicular manner. So you can see that I'm separating the acetabulum and the femoral head by pulling the femoral head in a perpendicular direction, distracting the joint. That is a distraction. It's a non-specific technique that truly can improve general hip mobility. So here's the question. As we're down to these final two, which one of them truly answers the question, though? Well, what's the question? It says, which of the following mobilizations should be performed first? It doesn't ask which of the following mobilizations is the most effective. If it asked that, C would be the right answer, because C is the most effective to improve hip flexion and internal rotation range of motion here. But it asks which one should be performed first. And we should always perform a distraction before a specific glide. You might be saying, well, why? Well, distractions are there to often test the joint capsule to make sure that it's not too hyperreactive. It's kind of like testing it before we do a more specific technique. Because if a patient is painful with the distraction, you can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to be painful with more of a specific technique like posterior. So it's this is our procedure. It's how we test the joint first. So a distraction or this non-specific general technique will always precede a posterior, inferior, or anterior glide. All right. And so D is actually answering the question and therefore is the final answer here. D, distraction. Congratulations to those of you who got this one correct. This is a tough question right here. All right, it really is. And you really need to know these mobilization principles for the NPTE. If you're a PT student or new grad and you struggle with these types of principles, you've studied this over and over, but you seem to not be able to apply it on practice exams or the NPTE, I invite you over to our private free Facebook group where I'm helping students to understand how to answer questions like this, but to walk into that NPTE and dominate that thing. How do you get there? Go to www.nptegroup.com right now and let's get you in. All right. Can't wait to see y'all on the next episode. Let's get it.